Welcome to the Awaken Organization.
Welcome to the Awakened Organization. I'm Peter and...
I'm Jeremy.
Awesome. Shit. Let's do it again. Welcome to the Awakened Organization. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Peter.
And we have the honor and the pleasure to meet genuinely awesome business owners and people, humans, who are living in a way that is more sustainable, equitable, and just.
So we have the honor and privilege of meeting today with Carolina Miranda of Cultivating Capital, who's been helping B Corps for the last close to a decade, being a strong B Corp herself. And we're going to dive into all the nooks and crannies of becoming a B Corp, the advantages, the success stories, and the amazing thing and work that people are putting back into the world, being of service.
And she shares some of the inspirations along the way, talking with amazing leaders who have changed the way they do things just from going through B Corp assessment. She'll give us a bit of a background because she's so intimate with B Corps around the governance, B Lab, and all about them. And also how she got started, how she got into it, and how she turned from potentially a medieval history teacher into a CEO and entrepreneur.
And one spoiler alert, one B Corp that's giving away $10 million over 10 years to support female entrepreneurs. So stay tuned for an awesome show with Carolina Miranda, myself, and unfortunately, Jeremy will be with us throughout the show, but you'll just have to deal with that. Carolina, welcome to the podcast. We are beyond psyched to have you here. Jeremy has told me amazing things. I've read amazing things. So we're really psyched to be able to spend some time together for the next few minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's great. It's a pleasure and a privilege. We'd love to hear a bit of your origin story. You know, where does Carolina Miranda come from and what led you to this life of service?
Sure. I can tell you that it has been an unlikely journey. I never expected to go into business. In fact, when I was in college, I was an English history double major at a liberal arts college. I really expected to become a college professor focusing on medieval history. And Then I ended up clearly not taking that path and instead ended up going into a number of different fields. I was in publishing for a while. I was a teacher. And then I found myself working at the Red Cross, which was an organization that I really loved working for as a humanitarian organization. I really believed in the mission, and I'm really a do-gooder at heart. But while at the Red Cross, I really realized that the nonprofit sector didn't have the resources to affect the kind of change that I really wanted to see. Nor did I feel that I was personally prepared for being able to do the work that I wanted to do. And so what happened is I started really kind of thinking about, well, what career path should I pursue? And, what do I need to do to level up my own skills to really make a difference in this world? And I had no interest in working for the government, and I knew I wasn't going to remain in the nonprofit sector. So I started looking at how I could move into the private sector. And as part of that journey, I actually ended up going back to school, getting a degree focused on sustainable enterprise and business. And while I was there, I started thinking about, well, what do I do after school? What is this going to look like? And at the time, I was working for a small green business in Berkeley, California. I'm based here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I really saw the potential in working with businesses. And I started to get this crazy idea of starting my own consulting business. And
crazy.
It ended up crazy, exactly, this crazy journey. And that was at the tail end of 2010 when I started the business. And, here we are. It has pivoted numerous times and it has evolved. I've made so many mistakes, but I feel very good about this, this path that I ended up embarking upon.
Well, I'm glad that you're with Jeremy and I in the non-perfect club, so we feel better about that. You're not mistake-free, so thank you for that.
Not at all.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your B Corp, Cultivating Capital?
Sure. So, Cultivating Capital is the company that I started more than a decade ago. And the focus was always on sustainability. And I ended up, as I started, kind of figuring out my way in the consulting world, really honing in on best practices for small businesses, because the larger businesses have more resources. They can hire, a chief sustainability officer, a, impact officer, whatever title it is that's used. They have the resources, they can bring in outside consultants. But really, the small businesses are the ones that have, bigger challenges in terms of knowing what to do and then knowing how to do it. So that's really where I started focusing my attention. And I really started looking at the B impact assessment as really the best tool to use, because it does bring in a range of, really good practices across key areas. So, for small businesses, they don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. They, really can look at what are the best practices that are out there and how can they bring those to their organizations. So when I was in grad school back in 2008, 2009, I had learned about B Corps, really just fell in love with the movement, recognized that it was really a movement that can drive systemic change. And so I had told my last employer at the time that, they should get certified as a B Corp. They ended up doing that. I was able to help with that process. And so when I started Cultivating Capital, I knew from the beginning that it was going to be a B Corp. You do have to wait for 1 year before you can get certified, because you have to have a track record. And so it wasn't, until 2012 that I could actually complete the certification. So, that's basically how Cultivating Capital got started. And, now it's really in an exciting place. It was basically a one-woman shop for many years, and I've recently started growing the team. So in some ways,
Congrats.
it's like a 10-year-old startup. So thank you. Because now we have a really wonderful team that's helping me to, do the good work in the world that we're trying to do.
So you learned about it and then decided that you wanted to do that, right, for your previous employer, and then also do that professionally. What was it about, I'm assuming that there were a number of things you'd learned about, but what was it about this one that kind of pulled you in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it helps to kind of think about it in context. Back in 2008, 2009, that's really when kind of sustainability was starting to reach, broader mainstream awareness. And so everybody was talking about going green. And, very quickly, the term greenwashing entered the vernacular. And, we realized that a lot of people were greenwashing. They were talking about these green practices that sounded good on the surface, but they weren't really making, significant internal changes either within the organization or, in their supply chain or anything like that. And so it was, in some ways, it was kind of like the wild west of sustainability.
Can I just want to pause you? Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to give an example of greenwashing? Because I know the term, but I don't know that everybody's familiar with the term.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one example would be, for example, when companies would put something on their website saying, we sell eco-friendly products, right? And it's like, well, what does that mean? It sounds good, but what is the inherent environmental attributes of that product, right? Does it have recycled inputs? Are you tracking the amount of recycled inputs, right? Does it meet some type of third-party certification, like having, organic inputs, for example, where that it's actually a product that was produced, with inputs that generate fewer toxins. So there are some specific ways that you could actually measure and manage the environmental benefits of the products that you're selling. But when companies are greenwashing, they're not necessarily doing any of that, right? They're just kind of, putting this nice verbiage on their website that sounds good, and it will kind of draw customers in. Another example, might be companies that will put something in their mission statement or, on their About Us page saying, we are here to take care of the planet, or, taking care of the planet is important to us. But, they're not necessarily looking at their carbon footprint, right? They might not even have like basic, recycling diversion practices set up. So, it's really when there is a disconnect between what a company is saying and what a company is actually doing. Is that
Thanks. Yeah, I think
helpful?
I think of some TV ads that used to run for BP, the British Petroleum. It would say Beyond Petroleum, and it would show like beautiful nature and, whatever fuel cell technology and wind turbines. And meanwhile, they're oil company.
Yeah.
They're selling the dream. They're selling the dream, Jeremy.
That's another great example.
So yeah, sorry to derail. So you were filling us in about the path of cultivating capital. So kind of the times, right? Right after the econopocalypse of 2008 and 9, and the sustainability movement, and moving right into this greenwashing, and then.
Yeah, and then kind of, into this wild west of, there's no rules around sustainability and being green. B Lab started putting forth this idea that there should actually be some clear and transparent standards, that it should actually mean something very tangible when a company says that they are acting in a way that is socially and environmentally responsible. And they introduced the standards so that it wasn't anymore just a matter of, companies saying that they're doing good and maybe, one company is doing it, another company isn't, but it actually became something that could be very clearly and objectively measured. And then that, of course, was paired with having a third party actually vet those practices, right? So that it isn't just the company making its own claims, but it's actually an independent organization being able to verify that the company is actually doing that. And so when I saw that, for me, I was like, this is it. This is what's needed. This is what businesses need in order to know that they are implementing some good practices in their organization. And this is what consumers need to actually be able to kind of separate those from, who are talking the talk from those who are just, those who are walking the walk versus those who are talking the talk. And then, shortly after the companies started getting certified, B Lab actually did something that for me was even more important and more significant, which is they started introducing a legal requirement. Because prior to the introduction of benefit corporations, there were really only a couple of options for companies, right? You could set up as a C Corp, as an S Corp. You could also set up as an LLC, but none of those actually prioritize and place stakeholders at the center of a company's decisions. And so, B Lab was instrumental in really driving that change. And now there's, benefit corporation legislation in just over 30 states, I believe. I don't have the exact number, but it's something that, did not exist until B Corps actually started driving that and making that a requirement for certification. So again, in terms of looking at how we drive systemic change and being able to identify, what are those mechanisms that are really going to, yield significant results, addressing legal entities is a key way of doing that. So, those are the reasons why I believed back then and continue to believe now that, this is really the key movement to really bring about change in our society.
I feel, Carolina, you're going back 2012, you're like a B Corp OG, and Jeremy's in, and we at Karma Dharma are in the process this year, as you know, of applying. But a lot of people out there, the B Corp brand isn't known by everyone, nor there's B Lab or the assessment. Maybe could you just give, for the people who aren't in the know, a little bit of an overview of B Lab, B Corp, assessment, just what that is?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I sometimes am so immersed in this space that, I
All
don't
good.
always
All good.
define my terms before I just launch in and start using them. But yes, so B Corp certification is a third party certification that measures a company's impact on all stakeholders. When we talk about stakeholders, it's really a significant shift in terms of how we can think about who a company is impacting, because traditionally a company only really had to think about shareholders and, obviously, people who just own shares of a company, the owners. But by shifting the lens to stakeholders, it's really calling upon the business to take a more holistic look at what it's doing. So how is it touching employees, customers, members of the local community, the environment, suppliers, basically anybody who has a stake in how that company operates. And so B Corps are basically looking at their impact upon all stakeholders and trying to make that a positive one. The way that they get certified is they have to complete the B Impact Assessment, which is an online tool that can be freely used by anybody. You don't have to be a B Corp to use it, but you can go in and use it. And it basically has a lot of questions that ask about a company's practices. And as a company answers those questions in the affirmative based upon what they're doing, then they start to earn points. And then when they earn points that get up to 80, they can then submit their assessment for certification to B Lab. B Lab is the nonprofit behind the B Corp movement. And so they will review the assessments that come in. They will assign a standards analyst to each company, and that analyst is basically responsible for verifying a company's answers. So they don't just assume that everybody has answered everything accurately, but they will go in and make sure that everything can be verified. And then when the analyst verifies at least 80 points worth of information, then the company can be certified, and the certification is valid for 3 years. And at that point, a company does need to recertify in order to maintain its certification.
And just for a little bit of context for people, could you just speak to what Cultivating Capital does? So your role in this world that you are immersed in?
Yeah, so we do two things. On a very practical level, what we do is we help companies to get certified and recertified. So if a company wants to get certified, but maybe they're not sure exactly what it might look like for them to bring these practices into their organization. They're, not sure about what the process is. They're looking for some assistance in those areas. Then that's what we do. We help them to understand what the best practices are as reflected on the impact assessment, to identify the ones that make sense for their business, and then to be able to put all the information together so that they can go through the certification process, in as smooth a manner as possible. On another level, I would say that what we do is really support the movement as a whole. So there's B Corps all around the world, just under 5,000 at the time of this recording. And, it's just really something that is happening on a global level. And yet, as Peter just mentioned, a lot of people don't yet know about B Corps. And so, there's really a lot of work to be done to just raise awareness, to bring people into the movement. And that is something that is a big part of what we do. And it really is in recognition of the fact that, this is a long game. We might help one company get certified this year, and that's wonderful. We're happy to do that. But to really change our economic system so that it works for everyone is something that is most likely going to take decades. And that's the long game for us.
You mean we're not going to move away from profits overnight? You're killing me here.
Well, we don't have to move away from profits. We just have to, put other things on par with profits. And unfortunately, at least here in the US, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Well, we're up here in Canada, and we're a little more left of center than down there in the US, and it still might take us some time to put people and purpose first. I'm not anti-profit. Clearly, B Corps are for-profit do-gooders. But maybe balancing the love we're sending to all the stakeholders may take a little bit of time.
I think it is something that's going to take a lot of time. It took time to get this economic system in place, and it's going to take time for it to change as well. But I think that you guys in Canada are a bit ahead of us over here.
We hug a good tree up here, Carolina. I'll tell you that collectively. I talk to my family in the US and I try not to get into politics because they just think we're a hair away from being communists up here. So can you tell us a little bit how the B Corp world has changed over the past 5 years? I'm sure it's evolved from when you were starting to now. We see it from EDI becoming a hot topic, or, environmental, sustainable, and governance becoming a hot topic. At least it's becoming, I'm not going to say fully mainstream, but part of a lot of conversations, other than paying lip service to corporate social responsibility. So maybe you could tell us how has the B Corp landscape transformed itself or evolved over the past few years?
That's a great question. I would say, the first thing that has changed is there's just so much more awareness now. And it's kind of funny to say that because a lot of people would say that B Corps aren't well known. And it's true, they're not well known. But if you look at how well known they are now compared to 5 years ago, there really has been a very significant shift. I think we're starting to reach the tipping
100%.
point in terms of, awareness around B Corps. Another thing that I think has changed is it's getting attention from larger companies, like Danone is, now a B Corp. They have several of their subsidiaries that are B Corps. That was not the case a few years ago. And so one of the benefits of having these larger multinationals starting to pay attention to the B Corp movement is that, now it's really just kind of raising the conversation and just kind of bringing up a lot more awareness around mainstream consumers that wasn't necessarily there before. As far as the specific practices, the standards that B Corps follow, I think there's definitely been an evolution in that regard as well. And that's really something that is going to continue because the standards are being continually evaluated. So one of the things that B Lab is looking at now is actually shifting from using the impact assessment as kind of the sole source of evaluating a company's practices to actually having some very clear standards in specific areas. So, for example, they're looking at having 10 standards that all companies must meet in order to become a B Corp. And this includes things like paying living wages, for example, having an environmental management system. So they're starting to get very specific about things that all B Corps would have to do, because the way it's set up right now, one company may get to 80 because they have really strong environmental practices, but maybe they're not so strong in the worker section, whereas another company may get to 80 because they have really outstanding worker practices, but maybe they're not doing as much on the environmental side. And so B Lab is looking to really standardize that, and it is going to be a big change in terms of what it means to be a B Corp. And at the same time, I think that the reason why they're doing it, which is really important, I think it makes a lot of sense because they're really looking at collective impact. So if all B Corps are paying living wages, for example, or if all B Corps are implementing certain JEDI practices, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, then that means that collectively we can have a bigger impact than if, some B Corps are doing one thing and other B Corps are doing another thing.
Makes sense. Just as a small note, and this is a Canadian reference, but speaking of the transition to business, the Business Development Bank of Canada, which is an arm's length government organization up here, which supports entrepreneurs. So this is the bank where entrepreneurs go because the traditional banks won't lend to them. They're too high risk, are a certified B Corp.
Yeah.
So the people lending to people growing new businesses at their heart of hearts are do-gooders, which I just find amazing for a government organization up here.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know the BDC has been doing a lot of good work with Canadian B Corp. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm curious if the, Danone, for example, and there's a few other, kind of big multinationals aren't brands that jump to my mind when I think of sustainability. So it's interesting, whether or not the new standards would impact that dramatically or not.
Yeah, Danone's an interesting example because Avion actually got certified as a B Corp. And of course, as a sustainability consultant, what comes to my mind is, they're selling bottled water, right? Like bottled
Plastic
water is like just one of the things that, is kind of the number one example of, lack of sustainability. In their case, or not just in their case, but in general, B Lab does actually require companies in certain industries to provide disclosures if there's anything that can be a little sensitive in terms of, how they're operating or their products. And so Danone, and for their Avion certification, they did actually have to fill out a public disclosure for B Lab, and they did have to address the fact that plastic water bottles are their main product. But I think that they were doing some other kind of practices to kind of offset that impact. Like I think they were using recycled plastic, and they were kind of trying to be good stewards in terms of water practices.
Yeah, I'd be shocked to see like Halliburton is the next certified B Corp or something like that.
Yeah.
Hopefully the standards hold.
I would be floored if that happened.
But switching to kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, so you have a unique perspective because you interface with tons of companies that are on this path of using business to do good in the world. I'm curious, what are some of the most inspirational companies or leaders that you've come across, that have kept you going doing this?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate that almost every client I work with inspires me in some way. And, almost every colleague that I work with also inspires me in some way. It's really what keeps me going, especially in light of all this negative information that we're unfortunately surrounded by.
She doesn't want to pick
ways.
favorites, Jeremy. She doesn't want to pick favorites.
No,
I'm seeing
but
this.
I do have one. I do have one that I'll share. And it's really a wonderful company that is doing great work. The company is called Frank and Eileen, and they actually sell women's button-down shirts. And the CEO, Audrey McLaughlin, got very inspired by going through the impact assessment. And one of the things that we were looking at is actually kind of formalizing, a giving commitment. And what she decided to do was to give $10 million over a 10-year period to support women entrepreneurs.
Wow.
And that was just really inspiring because it definitely went above and beyond what B Corps are, required to do. It went above and beyond what she needed to do to be certified as a B Corp, but she really tapped into kind of the potential and the opportunity that came up by going through this process. And, making a commitment like that, certainly, yes, it does help on the impact assessment, but, think of like these women entrepreneurs that are going to be receiving ongoing support, from Frank and Eileen. This could really make a big difference for them. And it's really something that could just have an impact, for years, decades to come. And, when I look at that, I don't even know if inspired captures what I feel by seeing a woman entrepreneur make a commitment like that is just going to have these ripple effects, in the future. And, that's probably, one of the most, just one of the greatest examples that I've seen. But, there's things that I see like just on a day-to-day basis. Another client that I worked with, a small company, works in an industry where there's very thin margins, and a lot of the employees are immigrants. And she was already trying to pay the best salaries that she could, but again, there were thin margins, and yet she really decided, as we were going through the impact assessment, to increase, workers' salaries. And that was really a wonderful step for her to take, because it was not an easy decision to make. But yet, it was something that was going to have a direct and positive impact on, these workers who really didn't have too many other employment opportunities that would have paid them, what she was committing to pay them. So it's decisions that I see like that being made on a regular basis, by companies that really just give me hope on so many levels.
You mentioned earlier, like reaching a tipping point. If it just really seems like there's a lot more activity and maybe more backlog and overwhelm of the B Lab organization for in terms of supply and demand, in terms of what they can support and the number of people that want to do good, which is heartening. Is that just, are you seeing that too? Or is that just kind of my little echo chamber of being in the B Corp community? Or be curious to get your perspective on kind of the movement as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it is reaching this tipping point. One of the interesting things was 2020 was such a challenging year on so many levels. And yet, I think it really started to enter people's awareness on a much deeper level that B Corp certification was a very tangible way to address, all of these problems that we saw around us. So, certainly you started to see who were the frontline workers and, how were they kind of bearing the brunt of, the pandemic in ways that, other people were not. And then certainly, with all of the social unrest, after the murder of George Floyd that summer, that also raised people's awareness about systemic racism in a way that it did not exist, really prior to that. And obviously I'm speaking from a very US centric perspective here, but, those two things really kind of catalyzed awareness and, I would say, motivation and urgency to really have companies look at, what is it that they can do. And so, that's one of the reasons why since 2020, B Lab has seen an increase in the number of submissions that they're receiving. It's one of the reasons why now more people are talking about B Corps, because B Corp certification alone is not going to solve all the problems, but it is a very tangible path for companies to take if they do want to directly address some of these fundamental issues that we're seeing. And so I think that we are kind of reaching a point as a society where the role of the private sector is becoming more and more important. Consumers are paying more attention. Millennials are paying more attention. Business owners are paying more attention. And so I don't see us going back to a point where these issues are no longer part of the discussion the way that they are now. If anything, I only see it going forward.
Becoming
Peter, to your earlier comment about having to give up on profit, I see this as the only sustainable model in the future. Hopefully, the future that I want to live in is that businesses have to do good,
and you're part of co-creating. And if consumers start supporting that and start voting with their wallets, which more and more people are, it would be hard to deny that the level of consciousness of consumers has ever been higher. It can always get better, clearly, and not everybody's light has been turned on. But, as a whole, people wanting to buy responsibly and taking a look at people's why they're doing what they're doing and how they're doing what they're doing I've never talked about it more. And it's not because I'm in this incestuous bubble of do-gooders. I'm just saying in general, you hear people want to get educated and don't want to support, offloading junk to beaches in Pakistan and poisoning kids and whatever that might be, right? I think people are there and want to be there. And people like Carolina, well, you're helping educate that process, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to do my part. And I do think that a lot of people are there. there's more awareness. Like even if you just look at awareness around eating healthy, right? Like the way that people are
Yeah,
paying attention
100%.
to what they eat
Yep.
now is completely
Yep.
different from what it was 10 years ago. And so the fact that, B Corps, a lot are offering products, that are like, organic or, pesticide free or non-GMO or things like that, it is going to help them to get their products in front of this audience. I also think though that, realistically, there are going to be some people that for whatever reason are never going to necessarily, come around, maybe because it's just not important to them, or it's just not something that, they are going to prioritize. And and that's fine. I think that that's just being realistic about the world that we live in. You never get 100% of the people on board, with something.
Sure.
So, my approach has always been, how do you support those people that are at least open to, to supporting these practices within their own companies, and to supporting, these types of companies through their own purchases, right? In an ideal world, everybody would buy B Corp products all the time. In the real world, we need to get as many people as possible to do that, and understand that, it's unlikely to ever be 100%, and that's okay. That's okay.
We can strive for it, though. We can strive
Oh,
for it.
absolutely.
Do
Absolutely.
do you have any? You talked about us about Frank and Eileen, and your other example of your client. So selfishly, we would, if ever they'd love to come on the podcast, we'd love to chat with them and amplify their voice and story. But do you see any success stories? You've seen just these amazing, B Corps just kicking ass and taking names out there.
Gosh, okay, this is going to be a case where there's going to be so many that I'm not going to be able to think of one
Too
to
many,
highlight.
and we won't blame you if you maybe just anything that comes to mind. And we would like to tell, as a disclaimer to all of your clients who've worked with you, this doesn't mean you love whoever you're going to talk about more. It just happens to mean you remember them on the spot in the podcast, that it came to mind under pressure.
The painting behind you distracted her, Peter.
Jeremy gives me hell for my old man painting back here, over here. So for the people just listening,
actually nice and comfortable, nice and colorful there.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you. Need a little support here for my painting. Sorry, back to you in serious business here, Carolina. I think you were going to say something much more relevant than Jeremy.
It's hard to think about serious business with that painting behind you, though.
Thank you.
Now you're on the bandwagon.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I'm leaving. No, I'm kidding. Jeremy's corrupted.
It got commented on in the first episode too, so it's going to come up.
I have to get a second one if this keeps going.
I'm going to choose actually one client that I'm working with right now who is not yet a B Corp, but she is well on her way to becoming a B Corp. And she's just doing some really cool work. The company's name is Descalza. And what she does is she actually sources fabrics from traditional weavers in El Salvador and Guatemala. And she's a designer, and so she actually makes the designs for clothing. She brings those textiles to North Carolina, where she has them sewn by local seamstresses, many of whom are Latino immigrants. And then she actually sells this product, to consumers, here in the U.S. But what I really love about what she's doing is there's so much thoughtfulness and so much intentionality in terms of her production process and everything that she is doing to bring this clothing to consumers. And that's such a different model from what we're used to, which is, having textiles, that are sourced without consideration for the environment, or for the people working in the factories who are often overseas, that are then sold, at a low price point and eventually end up in the landfill. And so, you contrast that, that kind of fast fashion, unsustainable model with what Descalza is doing. And it's just completely different. And, and she is just a wonderful young entrepreneur who is building this business and making it happen because it's something that she, believes in wholeheartedly. And so I'm just very honored to be able to, to support her in joining the B Corp community so that, she can use that as a way to, tap into the community, build a better network, build a strong network that can really support her. And then also, be able to leverage that, as she grows the company. So, that's definitely one thing that, I'm just very excited about right now, in terms of the clients that I'm working with. But all my clients are doing exciting work. So I could probably keep you here, all afternoon, just sharing more stories.
I'm going to say you love them all equally, just so we spread that, just like your kids. Nobody gets special treatment here. As we come close to the end here, Carolina, we have a couple questions for you. One is, as you well know, when you go through the assessment and the certification, you have to put all these policies in place. So whether you're a B Corp or not, is there one policy or procedure you think every company, B Corp or not, should have?
It's not, well, I guess it is a policy, but it's more than a policy. Everything's going to be more than a policy at the end of the day, right?
Good point.
So I would say living wage is key. I think everybody should be paying a living wage. Maybe 15 years ago, people didn't know that, people, and I'm not pointing fingers, but just collectively, we weren't necessarily thinking about living wages, the way that we are now. And now we know, at least here in the US, the federal minimum wage is just nowhere near being enough for a living wage. And
what is living wage?
So,
how do you define that, Carolina? How do you define that? So for people who don't, I think people have heard it or may not have heard it, but how do you define a living wage?
Yeah, it's basically what a person needs to earn to be able to have their basic needs for like food and shelter met in a given area. So the important thing to realize is that the living wage is going to be different in a place that has a high cost of living compared to a place that doesn't, right? So for example, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. The cost of living here is among the highest in the country. So what it takes to actually, pay for an apartment and buy groceries here is going to be very different than what it might be, almost anywhere else in the US, right? Except for New York City. So the living wage is not static across a country or even necessarily across a state. It's hyper local in some ways. And you can't just rely on the federal minimum wage to ensure that people are going to be able to pay for food and shelter. That's why you have companies that are paying the federal minimum wage, but yet they have workers who are working full time and still qualify for public benefits because their pay is just so low.
Amazing.
So I think that one of the most important things that any company can do right now is pay a living wage. And this reflects my own personal values. I am, by background and training, a sustainability consultant, but a big part of my focus is really on the social impact, not just what are we doing to preserve the environment for 7 generations from now. That's important. I absolutely believe that we do need to think about that. But I don't want us to lose sight of what can we do to help the people who are here right now. And so that's why, the living wage is just one very basic step that, all companies can look to take to help.
Amen to that.
I love that. I love that businesses that are doing good, typically the founder, whoever kind of got them on that path, has their own passion around some cause or seeing some good manifest in a specific way. And I love that doing business with those businesses means that my spending money with them manifests their vision. And because I'm seeing a lot of this in the B2B space of other companies coming to us and they're B Corps and they want to do business with B Corps and we're B Corp. And that, we're planting trees to offset, their IT, right? So we're doing an environmental piece and responsibly disposing of their e-waste and, moving towards this employee ownership. And so they spend dollars with us knowing that that's the benefit that they get. And then we get to turn around and spend dollars with our vendors knowing that they're doing things like, providing $10 million to women entrepreneurs over the next decade or whatever it is. Like, I just love that I know that my dollars, our company's dollars are going there to all of these different things that are tied to people's individual passions. Which is why it's so great to talk to you. Because then we get to hear about your piece, right? So the social side, even though you support all the B Corps on their path or the aspiring B Corps on their path, you also have your own kind of interest side too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the way that, you framed it around like, B Corps working with other B Corps, because it's basically another level of the voting with your dollars that Peter mentioned, right? It's like we vote with our dollars as consumers. And certainly I have B Corp milk in the refrigerator right now, right? And I'm always looking to buy B Corp products just in my day-to-day life, right? And yet the purchasing that we do through our businesses is just another level of that. And so, I think it's important for all of us to support those companies that we know that are aligned with our values, because there's plenty out there that just are not.
Yeah, B Corp milk sounds like it would be green, but
yeah, technically, technically it's by a company that's certified as a B Corp.
Don't encourage him, Carolina. Don't encourage him here.
Yeah.
So maybe that'll get edited out as well.
No way. We're going to keep the good part.
You should have told me about the editing function here.
No way. We're keeping it all. We're keeping it all.
Creating more work for AC.
You have any exciting projects? So one last question is, any exciting projects you're working on that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so one of the things that I am working on, and it's just about ready to go, it's just a matter of kind of fine tuning it, is we're rolling out a program to provide pro bono support to women of color entrepreneurs to help them get their companies certified as B Corps. And so our commitment is to be working with 2 entrepreneurs at a time. So we are working with 2 right now. And just yesterday, I was speaking with a young lady doing really good work. We're not yet working together, so I don't want to mention anything about it, but she's probably going to be the 3rd pro bono client that we'll take on as part of this program. And my idea is it would be wonderful to just have this be a continuing part of what we do, because I believe wholeheartedly in this movement, and I want to make sure, that being able to provide support is not determined by a company's ability to pay. Obviously, we have to pay the team, we have our own giving commitments and so on. And so, yes, you do obviously, make money from the services that you offer. And we try to offer a number of different options for clients at different price points. But even so, it is cost prohibitive sometimes for, a young company that's just getting started to hire a consultant. And so we want to just remove that as a barrier and just be able to help them. And then as part of that, I'm also helping to identify partners who can pay the certification fee for the first year for the women that we work with. So we'll offer the pro bono support, but then you still have to pay fees to B Lab when you get certified. And so I have a couple of partners lined up that are ready to cover those fees for these young women. So that's exciting.
I would like to throw Karma Dharma's name in that hat from the sense of if we do pro bono work as well for some charities. We do a lot of work in the not-for-profit space and a few B Corps. But how about this, Carolina, as a payback for you coming to spend a little time with Jeremy and I'd love to support one of the people you're supporting. If they need a little marketing support or a little design support, if we can give them a little push to share their story out in the world, I'd be down for that.
Well, thank you. That's a very generous offer, and I'll definitely take you up on that.
Deal. That is a deal.
I can't let Peter one-up me, so I'm going to throw into the ring. I'm going to get you a replica of the painting that is hanging behind Peter.
Oh my God. This freaking painting. I'm going to have nightmares about this painting now. You see, I love this painting, and now it's just dying a slow death here. Carolina, where is the best place people can reach you or support you, find you? Where can we send them?
Yeah, best thing to do is to go to the website, which is cultivatingcapital.com. And we have a contact form there. If anybody fills that out, then one of my team members will review it and pass it on to me. Or you can also just connect with me directly on LinkedIn.
Awesome. This has been superb. I'm so excited that you came. For the people just listening, I have my cheeks hurt because I've had this permagrin of inspiration like this whole time, just listening to like amazing shit happening in the world and the great things you're putting back out there and setting the example for people. So tremendous gratitude for you coming to see us and spending some time with us, Carolina.
Great. Thanks again for having me here. It was fun.
And make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Oh, sorry. Let me do it again. Thank you to the team. Thank you to AC. Thank you to Peter. Thank you to Carolina Miranda. All you listeners, please do subscribe. Leave us a review if you enjoyed it. Give us any feedback, and we'll see you next time. How's that? Was that better?